Good morning. Welcome to the webinar. Can I just do a sound check? Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So welcome to the webinar, Current Issues with Customs in Vietnam. My name is Van Lee, and I'm the moderator for today's webinar, the 7th of the Investing in Vietnam webinar series brought to you by KPMG Vietnam. KPMG has been in Vietnam since 1994 and is one of the largest professional services firms in the country with offices in Ho Chi Minh City, Hanoi, and Da Nang. Today we are proud to have with us our speaker for today, Mr. Rohit Sinha, a senior manager in our trade and customs section at KPMG. Welcome back, Rohit, to the webinar. Before we begin, I just want to go over a couple housekeeping issues. We have a very informative webinar planned for you full of key topics, which include overview of the customs environment in Vietnam, free trade agreements and challenges, cost saving and compliance programs, and then we have saved about half an hour for a question and answer session. After the main presentation from Rohit, we have set aside the last 20 to 30 minutes of today's webinar for the question and answer. If you have a question for our speaker, please submit your questions by typing into the chat window at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen and then hit send. I will collect the questions from the chat window as we go and share with our speaker after the presentation. Without further delay, I will hand the floor over to Rohit to introduce himself and start his presentation. Just a little bit about Rohit. He is our senior manager, as I mentioned, for trade and customs in the integrated international tax team at KPMG Vietnam. He's been providing indirect tax and international trade services for over 9 years. He's worked in New Delhi, India, and was in Hong Kong for over 5 years, providing indirect tax advisory to clients in the Asia Pacific region. So he knows tons of stuff. So throw us as many questions as you want. Okay, Rohit, I'm handing it over to you now.
Thanks, Van. Hi, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear us properly. So in today's session, we'll just quickly go through the current issues in Vietnam, which is, I think we had the, yes, so the topics would be the customs environments in Vietnam. Then we will go over some of the issues with the free trade agreements, the role of free trade agreements in Vietnam, and then a couple of new or existing trade programs, which some of you may already be aware of, such as first sale for export or trade facilitation programs, which has been recently been finalized. Okay, so to start with, valuation. Like any other country, valuation is the most hot topic in Vietnam, and it's been on customs radar for almost. I mean, it's one of the top 3 issues which customs has identified. Recently, there was a survey organized by one of the chambers of commerce, and even customs agreed that they screen around 1/4 or 25% of the transactions, and it's not just based on the relationship, whether or not you declare yourself as a related party. Customs here, they are getting advanced, they are training themselves, so now they question the relationship which has been declared by importers. There are more and more cases where global companies or MNCs operating in the region, they declare themselves as unrelated companies, which is a clear red flag. So customs has been challenging the relationship, and another is the valuation of the related party imports. So relationship and the HS code interpretation, they are the 2 main reasons for customs to challenge the valuation here. As some of you may know, under Vietnamese customs law, the relationship between an importer and exporter, they call it a special relationship, which is similar to what the WTO valuation guidelines have. There are different circumstances or scenarios where 2 parties can be treated as related to each other. but the term used in Vietnam is called special relationship. So if you declare yourself as special, to have a special relationship with this supplier, you are certain to get a special attention from customs. And like we mentioned in the beginning, their customs is now also challenging the relationship declaration. So in Vietnam, the code for related parties is code 7 in the customs declaration form. Most of the times, not just the small businesses or the medium-sized businesses, even the MNCs, their customs agent or customs team in Vietnam, they declare themselves as unrelated. And the code for unrelated is code 6. And a lot of it is coming from unawareness between in the customs team or the compliance team of the companies, and which gives a tool or an excuse to customs to open a whole set of questions or issues for the companies. So they will go into the relationship and then start questioning the valuation. And one of the side effects, if we for the lack of a term, of working in operating in Vietnam, is that what we see is not many companies maintain proper documentation to support their valuation. So they don't have proper contracts or transfer pricing policy in place, and which is used by customs, or which just works in customs favor to challenge the valuation practice of the company, and then custom reassesses and revalues your imports. Just to share an experience on a no-name basis, a luxury goods importer, a global company, they are also doing business in Vietnam, and their customs agent, they declared their transactions as unrelated. If you are a global company, if you are a global brand, everyone, and especially customs, would know about it. Customs started, it was acceptable to some officer, but then someone started challenging their relationship, and then customs reassessed their case, and now the company has to go back and accept that they declared the relationship declared by them was incorrect. And it has given just an excuse or a tool to customs to go back and reassess all their imports. And there could be a case that the valuation is perfect. It's based on arm's length transaction. They have proper transfer pricing, contracts, details, everything in place. But it's just too much compliance, too much time and effort, and administrative work for the company. So relationship needs to be analyzed carefully, and it's always safe to declare your relationship correct, to declare the correct relationship with customs. It will likely the valuation would likely get picked up by customs, but to start off by declaring yourself as a related party still gives you some basis or some support from customs, instead of a scenario where customs accuses you of declaring the relationship, or misdeclaring the relationship for your own benefit. So it's also a lot of image and relationship management with customs in Vietnam. Similarly, you have commercial versus non-commercial imports. Vietnam customs has a unique practice where they maintain a database of price of all the goods imported into Vietnam. They may refer to it, they do not accept, they just use it as a benchmark to compare the prices of future imports. But they do accept, customs does accept that they use it as a reference. So if you have a product A imported into Vietnam, the price of that product will get uploaded in the database and would be used to compare the future imports of that product by other companies. And most of it is used when you import samples or consumables in Vietnam, and customs is likely to challenge the pricing of samples and consumables, because most of the times the companies themselves are also not careful about the value of samples and consumables, which gives another reason for customs to challenge the valuation. Overall, it's not much. It's around 3 to 5% of the transactions monitored by customs, but it depends also on the customs office. So if you have customs in Ho Chi Minh, where you have a lot of samples or consumables imported into Ho Chi Minh City by trading companies for their sales and marketing activities, it becomes a high number, and it starts affecting the day-to-day business operations of the companies. So it's always important to be careful of the price for which will be declared with customs, and for samples and for consumables, because customs will surely cross verify the pricing with their database. Second most important topic in customs framework or compliance in Vietnam is the classification. Vietnam being a member of the ASEAN, they are going to update their classification system from January 2018. Hi, can you hear us properly? Can you hear us properly, or?
Let me just do a quick sound check, guys. Sorry about that. So we may be having some technical problems. Can you hear us now? How are we doing with the sound? We okay? Okay. So I will let Rohit resume.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So just moving on. So Vietnam is going to implement the ASEAN Harmonized Tariff Network, the AHTN 2017, from January 1, 2018. And the process is already under place, and the AHTN has been implemented in some other ASEAN countries like Singapore, probably in Malaysia too. But what we see is that customs, they update themselves with the WCO and WTO classificatory explanatory notes, and the judgments passed by courts in the US and European Union. They also keep themselves updated with what's going on in OECD and other international forums. So just because it's a developing market, it's not a case that the customs is doing everything on manual basis. They are updating themselves, and they are very aggressive about it. So the customs officers now, they are far more technical and far more experienced than 5 years ago. But right now, Vietnam does not have a standard policy which is applied throughout the country. So different customs offices have some authority or some power to have a different interpretation of the law to an extent, not all, but to an extent. And we have seen cases where one company, they imported goods both in Hanoi in the north and Ho Chi Minh in the south for the same product. they were audited by both Hanoi Customs and Ho Chi Minh Customs. In the audit, the Hanoi Customs, they did not raise any questions about their classification. The company was importing a product and they did duty at the rate of 5% in Vietnam, both in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh. They got audited for the same period by Ho Chi Minh Customs, and then they challenged the classification because in their opinion, the product did not qualify to be classified under a particular HS code, and customs said that this product is subject to a higher rate of duty. Now, for a business of company doing business in Vietnam in two different offices, it creates a lot of administrative issues. How do you as a business maintain two separate HS codes for one country if you have to consolidate your regional accounts? You will have to maintain two sets of HS codes, two different rates of taxes, and how would you justify it in your accounting records? But this is a practical issue faced by companies doing business currently in Vietnam. And we have seen that the authorities, the higher level authorities, the customs administration, they are aware of it. And they are trying to standardize the process, coming up with policies and recommendations, internal recommendations for their staff to have a uniform interpretation of the law. But it's a process. It will take some time, but it's something that the customs authorities or the government is also aware of. So right now, yes, it's an issue. It's a problem area for the businesses, but we do expect that it will get standardized and it will be taken care of in the times to come. Similarly, for the import-export compliance, right now there's a lot of paperwork involved. It's comprehensive, a lot of checks and balances. The customs is digitizing the process. So you have now e-declarations and automatic approvals, but there is room to update and to upgrade the system as done by some of the customs authorities in the region. So, for example, Singapore customs or Japan customs, they have digitized a lot of their process, and the customs authorities in Vietnam, they also uh, go on these uh, experience sharing sessions with our overseas customs authorities. So these changes or these digitizations are a result of their discussions and their self-education from other countries. So it's also dependent on how much investment or how much support they get from the national government. So it will we hope that it gets better, but it's simply dependent on the budget, how much budget customs get from the from the national government. So, but with the current system and multiplied with the room for different interpretation by customs authorities, you have companies face problems when in their compliance for EPE versus non-EPE. A lot of record keeping, multiple stages of record keeping, and make sure to ensure that it matches with the records maintained by customs, which currently there is no system or in place to go and request customs for a formal detail. It depends from practice of individual customs office. So it's one of the concern areas for companies doing business in Vietnam. Post-clearance audits, it's something which everyone is aware of who does business in Vietnam, and some of you may be aware of it or may have already experienced it. It's similar to what the customs clearance audits or customs audits in other countries, but it's just a terminology used in Vietnam where your shipment is allowed to be cleared, and so you don't lose time on your supply chain or your deadlines, but customs will come back and conduct an audit of a specific period, let's say 6 months or 12 months or 24 months, and they will look into a whole set of issues from your compliance.
Hi, everyone. I think we just lost internet connection for a minute. So sorry for the technical difficulties. Can you hear me now? It's part of the joy of a society that depends on the internet. Okay, great. So I will let Rohit resume his presentation. Thanks, guys.
Sorry for the technical glitch, but I hope everyone can hear us properly now. Yeah. So for post-clearance audits in Vietnam, they can be initiated in under three different scenarios. One is the periodic audits which customs conduct every 5 years. Second is a PCA campaign where it's more like someone tipped off the customs, or they have some suspicion, or they do it based on the industry profile. So PCA campaigns are mostly done on based on industry profile and the risk or the importance of one particular industry in customs opinion. The third one is when you have a suspicion or someone tips off customs. So there is a proper system in place for to have a periodic customs audit, but you can also be picked up for the same period or for additional period of customs audit just based on a PCA campaign, or if customs has a suspicion that there is a non-compliance or a company is not paying adequate taxes, or an import license has not been obtained. And based on a recent survey conducted by the Customs Department itself, the importer's track record is one of the most important factors considered by the customs when they pick companies for under the PCA campaign. And industry, so sometimes you will have food and beverage industry, or sometimes steel industry, oil and gas. It all depends on the focus of the government and the Ministry of Finance, and in one particular period. So 6 months it's oil and gas, and another maybe 12 months or 18 months it's the focus is really on the food and beverage industry, what's going on in the food and beverage industry, their role in the economy, uh, and what's going on in the region. So multiple factors are involved when customs roll out these PCA campaigns. And right now, due to the lack of a standard procedure, PCAs are most are the most controversial issues. One of the most controversial issues in customs. So customs is likely going to challenge your valuation, your relationship, the duty rate, HS codes. These are just very standard topics which we see, which are very common from this point of view, and they are raised literally in all PCA or audit PCA campaigns or customs audits conduct organized by customs. That said, it's all's not lost yet. We, as we said, customs authorities and the governments, the Ministry of Finance, the highest level of customs authority, the General Department of Customs, they are well aware of these issues. They know that they need to standardize the process, need to standardize the regulations, the laws, and update them based on the changes in the global and regional economies and adjust themselves to the market forces. So they have started rolling out new laws and updating the existing laws. So, for example, they have recently introduced a law on foreign trade management, which will come in effect from January 2018. This law will is specifies what is a foreign trade activity, what foreign trade activities can be undertaken by a Vietnamese company or a foreign investment company without a legal presence or a physical presence in Vietnam. It has also uh, grouped all the anti-dumping and safeguard duty provisions in one regulations, because right now they are covered in multiple circulars or guidelines. So this foreign trade law will just group everything under one section, and the anti-dumping and safeguard duty regulations would be covered in the foreign trade law. This gives clarity to companies on what is the definition of a foreign trade activity, the activities allowed for a Vietnamese company or an overseas entity. Because similarly, they have also updated the circulars for customs procedure and the circular for valuation, customs valuation is also expected to be updated based on the recommendations of the WTO. And right now, we don't see that there would be any new laws coming up in the rest of the 2017, but in 2018 there would be some new laws and updates introduced by the government. So we have the law in foreign trade management. The government recently issued a law on technology transfer, which comes into effect from July 2018. So 2018 would be an interesting year to update the compliance and the legal framework of a lot of customs and the legal functions of the companies operating in Vietnam. As as we have seen that OECD has been issuing and working on the BEPS guidelines in the last couple of years, and uh, the compliance for CBCR and the documentation has picked up in the last few months, or just in not just in the region but also in Vietnam. There is a lot of discussion on going on to have a standardized link between customs and the transfer pricing policy, because currently Vietnam does not have a legal provision to formally accept the transfer pricing policy of a company under the customs valuation rule. It's an indirect way of proving the customs valuation, but there has been work going in the background to come up with some solution for this, and it's not just in Vietnam, but it's going on for multiple countries at the WCO level. The WCO, World Customs Organization, they published a guideline in 2015 to which to explain to the customs authorities that how transfer pricing is relevant for a company's business and how they should link or accept transfer pricing policy at the time of customs valuation. But right now, these are soft laws. It's WCO or OECD, they cannot implement laws for all the member countries. They can only come up with guidelines or recommendations, and the member countries need to implement their individual laws. There has not been much development in Asia or in any other part of the world in this as of now, but Japan has recently introduced a program where Japan Customs has will formally accept the year-end adjustment. So true up, true down, they would accept in for the customs valuation at the year end. There would be some requirements for companies to or conditions to be fulfilled, but now Japan has come up with a formal program. Now this is a very interesting development. Other customs authorities, including Vietnamese customs authorities, they are closely monitoring the developments in Japan, and it will be studied by them if to see if they can introduce a similar program in Vietnam. It may take a while. It would be nice that if they introduce it in the next 12 months or so, but on a conservative basis, it may take a while for Vietnam customs to introduce it, because they need to overhaul the customs framework, starting with standardized laws and regulations, digitization of the process, and then coming up with a link between transfer pricing and customs. So in this section, we will just give a brief overview of the free trade agreements for Vietnam, and then some of the issues or the practical issues faced by the companies when they try to execute or use the FTA benefits in Vietnam. So this is just a snapshot of the export sector in Vietnam, and as we can see, the merchandise export, Vietnam is the only country which has shown a consistent growth in the region. So most of the countries are seeing a negative growth, but Vietnam is still going strong, and it is expected to grow in the next 5 to 10 years. And the FTAs have played an important role in the growth of export sector from Vietnam. The government is already in negotiations with EU for executing the European Union Vietnam Free Trade Agreement. The Vietnam Korea Free Trade Agreement has played a very important role to attract investment from Korea into Vietnam. Korea is currently the biggest investor in Vietnam. So, and the Korean companies, they extensively use the FTA, the Korea Vietnam FTA, and we expect that there would be more and more FTAs coming in. So, for example, the EU Vietnam FTA and some other FTAs which are in the negotiation stage. But in 2018, we expect the EU Vietnam FTA to be finalized and implemented, and which would give another boost to the growth and investment in Vietnam. Some of the challenges, not just in Vietnam, but but in all countries, are the effective utilization or the use or the help from the FTAs to grow your export. Most of the times, the domestic industry, it catches up with the with the growth in economy, like in Vietnam. In 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, the domestic industry will become more organized, and the foreign investment or the foreign invested companies, they will start competing. They will start getting competition from the domestic industry. And one of the areas where the competition would be is the labor of how so on the procurement of labor, be it skilled labor, semi-skilled, or unskilled labor. It is not just specific to Vietnam. It is a trajectory which has been observed in all countries. So developed economies, developing economies, and LDCs. So it is a circle which will come in which will be experienced in Vietnam as well. But these are the challenges for the common challenges when selecting of an FTA or using FTA for long-term investment in a country. In the last section, we'll just give you a brief overview of some of the trade programs which can be used for cost savings, from customs, and also some new trade facilitation programs or the compliance programs coming in. So this one is a first sale for export program. Right, most of the times customs is seen as a cost or just a tax or pass-through tax, and it's seen as a compliance function. First sale for export is one of the programs where you can use customs duty to reduce your taxes, to reduce your landed cost. So it's a business planning done centered around the customs duty. It works mostly just for the US imports, because the US customs law allows the use of the manufacturer or the factory's invoice in for customs declaration purposes. It mostly works in industries where you have a high duty rate and high volume rate. For example, garments, apparel, footwear, these goods would be imported in high volume into the US, and they have a high duty rate, somewhere between 10 to 26%. And depending on your US imports planning, your volume, and the how many suppliers agree to implement first sale, it is possible to reduce up to 5 to 15% of the landed cost, which has a direct impact on the profitability or the margin of the company operating in the US. First sale, it does not give you an immediate cash benefit to as an exporter from Vietnam or in Asia, but it is an important factor considered by US companies when they for supplier consolidation, because the US market is also seeing a lot of competition and their profit margins are going down. So the companies are now focused on optimizing their landed cost. So the first sale readiness of the suppliers will also be one of the factors considered while the companies work on their long-term business plans with their suppliers in Asia. Lastly, we have a trade facilitation agreement. This is a program introduced by the WTO, and it has recently been concluded by the member countries in February this year. The objective of this agreement is to simplify the international movement of goods between different countries, have a single window for clearance, approvals, simplified documentations, and to reduce the overall time and effort and cost involved in the international supply chain of goods. It will be implemented in a phased manner. So A would be for developed economies, B for developing countries, and some extra time would be given to LDC economies for them to build up their infrastructure and to learn uh, from the programs already implemented in developed and developing countries. So economies like US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Japan, they would likely implement it as soon as possible. And in ASEAN, we're already seeing that the ASEAN countries, they are implementing a program similar to the trade facilitation. So Singapore and Malaysia have recently introduced a similar program, and they will likely update that program to match with the trade facilitation agreement. So this is a new development which will also be helpful for Vietnam customs to overhaul their framework, their laws, their compliance, come up with new facilities to make it easier for companies to do business in Vietnam. And we expect that this will be considered by the government in the next 12 months or so. We know that the government is considering the ASEAN equivalent of the trade facilitation agreement, and Vietnam and Cambodia are the next two countries on the target list for the ASEAN member countries for implementing the ASEAN trade program. Singapore and Malaysia have recently introduced it. That was a pilot organized by Singapore and Malaysia, and now Vietnam and Cambodia are expected to implement it, or at least do it on a trial basis. So we may see some changes and simplified procedures in the next few months introduced by Vietnam Customs.
So,
yeah.
It's now time for question and answer session. We have about 15 to 20 minutes devoted to Q&A. But we have a number of questions. So let me first remind you all that after this session, I will send a recording on YouTube for your reference, as well as Rohit's slide deck. And then any questions that I don't get to today, we will have Rohit follow up with each of you individually. So I see that out of the many questions that you have sent us, and thank you very much for submitting your questions, there are some that are a little more technical. So let me first start with the more general questions. Rohit, number one, should we use more than one logistics company in Vietnam? Can you give some advice on that?
Yeah, so it's there is no law which stops hiring more than one logistics company, but it depends on the business plan of the company doing business in Vietnam. Is it beneficial to you to hire more than one logistics company and do the compliance, or organize the logistics and supply chain with one logistics company and come up with a SOP with them for the operations throughout the country? So if it's all dependent on the business plan, but it's not prohibited to have more than one logistics company, but you also need to analyze, does it make commercial sense to have more than one logistics company?
Is it good practice or is it common practice?
It is a common practice for companies to hire more than one logistics company, but as the business grows, we are seeing that the companies are also consolidating their operations and their support functions, and it's always it's in their benefit, everyone's benefit, to have one point of contact and one company taking care of your logistics operations in Vietnam and in the region.
A second question, I think you already covered this in your presentation, but maybe you could reinforce. Does customs use the non-commercial price to reference to commercial shipment later?
Officially, no, but there is no stopping of customs to compare the prices for the commercial imports as well. So if you have a product and the price has which is imported in non-commercial mode, customs would likely compare the price with the commercial database. But if they sense that the goods imported under the commercial mode is underdeclared, the value is underdeclared, they may refer it, and and they may question the price of the value of goods under the commercial imports as well. But if there is a difference in value under the commercial import or the commercial imports mechanism, then the company should be able to justify the decrease or the decrease in or the fluctuation in price. Is it because of the circumstances to sale or volume, or is there a change in the business policy? So yes, customs may compare the price for the commercial imports, and the next step for the company would be to be ready to clarify and to explain the reasons for such price fluctuations to customs.
Thanks, Rohit. I have another question for you about customs audits. What would you say are the most common challenges to entities during recent custom audits in Vietnam?
Valuation is the most common topic faced by, or the challenge faced by companies, and most of the times it's the relationship. It's very easy to say that relationship, it's everyone is declaring it's just a compliance issue, but we have seen that even the big companies, they are not consistent in declaring their relationship properly, and then that gives just an excuse to customs to start to open a whole set of topics for during their PCAs, and they use it to challenge the valuation as well, and impose administrative penalty. So valuation, HS code classification, duty rate. These are the three major issues which we see raised by customs in all the the PCAs. And the relationship is also considered by customs, but that's linked with the valuation of goods.
Let's see. Maybe the next question we could ask a little bit in more general. How does somebody keep updated about the changes in law on customs procedures, tax and duties, and figure out which goods are under the management of Ministry of Health, for example, and which ones would be under MOIT? Maybe just generally deal with how to stay on
Yes,
top of
it is.
changes.
It is a concern area, and working in this field, we also face the problem of going through multiple ministries and checking which goods are covered or what laws are introduced by the Ministry of Health or Ministry of Information and Technology. There is some development in this regard, that the government is probably going to streamline the, uh, the departments or the goods under one ministry. They have recently done it for agricultural products, and which will be effective from January 2018. So the organic and inorganic products have been merged, and now they are under one department or one ministry. So right now there is no standard procedure. It's most of it is manual. We do it manually ourselves. But we have started seeing that the government is consolidating the goods and the activities from the point of their relevancy under different ministries and departments. So it's likely that the government will introduce some program where they will revamp, and the goods would be, or the activities would be assigned to the individual departments. Not like for one product you have to go to MOIT, and the second for some other department.
That's great. I think we have time for one more question, or maybe two.
Sorry,
which question did?
I think we had one question.
This one.
For the Form D.
The question is, could you shed some light around the issue of the CEO Form D, especially during the on-the-spot export-import?
Yeah. So for the on-the-spot import-export, it's a unique practice in Vietnam, where if you have a company in Vietnam entering into a sale contract with an overseas company or overseas buyer, but the buyer wants to get the goods delivered in Vietnam itself, it's called on-the-spot import-export clearance. The problem with this is that it's treated as an export or import from customs perspective. Now you can claim a Form D under the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, and for the Vietnamese importing entity, they can use it to pay a lower rate of taxes or claim duty relief. But there are some practical issues around this. The law, there's a decree, which is Decree 129 of 2016, which is which discusses the on-the-spot import-export compliance, which says that Form D would or the FTA benefits under the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement can be claimed only if the entity is in a free trade zone in Vietnam. So for on the spot import export compliance, if the exporter is in a free trade zone, they can get a Form D from the customs authority or the relevant authorities in Vietnam they give it to the importing company, which is in a domestic area in Vietnam, and the importing entity can then use that Form D to claim duty relief. But it works only when the exporter is in the free trade zone. Customs is very they implement they have a very strict interpretation for this. uh, if you have an exporter in a domestic area or in an industrial park, which is not a free trade zone, they can still go and obtain a Form D from the authorities. But if that Form D is used for the on-the-spot import clearance for by the buyer or by the entity who is doing the import clearance in Vietnam, they face the challenge that the customs deny them the benefit, the FTA benefit, because from the decree, the customs interpret it in a very strict manner because it's a cost for them. They say that the decree is very specific that Form D's benefit will be allowed only when the exporter is in a free trade zone.
This is related to actually another question, I think, maybe, which is from Sebastian. We want to manufacture products which we want to export worldwide, but first we have to import some special technical accessories from EU, US, Japan, India. We don't want to manufacture in an economic industrial zone. Do you have any advice on importing supplies?
Ideally, the manufacturing entities are set up in uh, the export processing zones or the free trade zones, because you have multiple benefits offered by the government. So you have tax benefits, compliance, and other support offered by the government. If you do not set up a company or the factory, if you do not wish to set it up in those free trade zone or special economic zones, then it's still possible. It's still possible to manufacture and export, but it just adds on a lot of compliance and a lot of duty factor for you. You can still claim a refund of the duty or an input tax credit of the duty, but it would be a lot of cash flow issue. It would involve a lot of cash flow management for payment of import taxes, and then manufacture. So you pay taxes at the time of import, manufacture, and then export the finished product from Vietnam, and then go back and reconcile your tax liability and claim a refund from customs. You may be able to get some tax relief for import of equipment and some other heavy machinery, but in general, anything which is imported in the free trade zone, they get a higher level of support from the government. But if that's part of the business plan that you do not wish to set it up in the free trade zone, you need to do full-scale market entry analysis on your business policy, the licenses you will need to obtain, your cost of operations, and your cash flow, your profit margin. All these factors need to be considered before you want to set it up in a non-free trade zone or in a domestic area. It's possible, but it's part of the business plan.
Rohit, that was super informative. Thank you for a great presentation and Q&A session.
Thanks, man, and thanks everyone for attending. We hope we covered some of the interesting topics for you. And if you have any further questions, please let us know, and we will be happy to respond to you through emails and see how we can be of further assistance to you.
So that's all the time we have for the webinar today. As I mentioned, I will be sending the slide deck and also the YouTube recording out to all participants. On behalf of Rohit and myself, let me remind you that KPMG Vietnam has a track record of navigating these interesting areas of business, such as customs and logistics. Please contact us if you would like advice on market entry or expansion of your business in Vietnam. On the screen now is a very brief survey. Oops, there was a brief survey. I will leave up a survey. If you could tell us what you thought of the webinar today, that would help us so much. On behalf of our esteemed speaker, Rohit, as well as the team at KPMG Vietnam, thank you so much for joining us and have a great rest of your day. And if you have any questions, just let us know. Thanks.